has had somewhat of a resurgence recently. Obviously, Amazon has done their horrible adaptation of the Silmarillion with the Rings of Power. They also recently did a terrible adaptation of one of the appendices that Tolkien wrote in The Lord of the Rings in the War of the Rohirrim. And Warner Brothers is actually working on a Hunt for Gollum film, and Philippa Boyens, who was the producer for War of the Rohirrim, she was also a screenwriter on Peter Jackson's excellent adaptations of Tolkien's work, has been talking about a number of other projects that she might be looking at adapting for Warner Brothers on top of the Hunt for Gollum. We know that they're working on a second film as well. They haven't told us any of those details, but she's talked about some of those things. And one of the things, stories that she talked about was Beren and Luthien. And I'm joined here by Tolkien expert Jonathan Watson of theonering.com, also the Exploring Tolkien podcast, to discuss these comments that Philippa Boyens has made, and whether or not, as Tolkien enthusiasts, Tolkien fans, we should be excited for this, or we should be extremely concerned, or maybe somewhere in between. So good to see you back here on the Trent Report. Jonathan, how are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me back, John. Appreciate it.
Great. So let's just dive right into this here. I wrote this up over at Fandom Pulse, and if I could be in the right tab here. But so these are some comments that Philippa Boyens made in December. I'd actually kind of missed out on them when she made them, but she spoke to Tolkien. She was obviously promoting the War of the Rohirrim, and she was asked what her ideal Tolkien story to adapt would be if she had no restrictions. And this is what she said: "I love the story of Lúthien and Beren in the Silmarillion. Also, there are threads of it, obviously, in the Lord of the Rings, but you have Aragorn and Arwen, which is such a beautiful love story. But before that, there was Lúthien and Beren. Excuse me. Also, it's an earlier age, and it's a kind of more mythic age. You've got some serious monsters. I love monsters that you could bring into that storytelling, but also she is such an incredible character, the character of Lúthien, and so there's some of her DNA, obviously, in Arwen and Galadriel, but even in these human characters, I think that courage to go and face down the thing that you're most terrified of." So that is what she had to say about her ideal story. And obviously, I think teasing that could be a potentiality of something that they might adapt with Warner Brothers, because she's clearly part of that production team that is working on, obviously, the Hunt for Gollum live action that Andy Serkis is directing. And then she recently did the War of the Rohirrim animated adaptation that they kept trying to tell us was an anime. But what do you kind of make of this? Is this something that you think is a reality? Do you like? So let's just start there first. Do you think this is something that they could indeed make?
Well, so no one actually has the rights to the story of Beren and Luthien. That is something that when Tolkien sold the rights to the Lord of the Rings back, I don't remember what year it was. I believe it was in the 60s, mid 60s. Anyway, they said, you may not do the story of Beren and Luthien. That is not allowed. So nobody has the rights to that. And so it's not even possible right now to make it. It's a, I'm kind of glad about that. So Beren and Luthien is the story of Beren, a mortal man who falls in love with Lúthien, the daughter of Thingol and Melian. And Thingol and Melian, that is the only coupling of an elf and an immortal Maiar, like Gandalf, right? So she is of the same level as Gandalf, his wife, and so they fall in love. They have a daughter, Lúthien. Beren, now a man, falls in love with her, and he says, "I'm going to," and Thingol, the king, says, "I will give you the hand of my daughter if you come to me bearing in your hand a Silmaril. If you have a Silmaril in hand." Now, a Silmaril is one of the great jewels that was created by Feanor. Before even the first age, right? Where he created these jewels that have the lights of the trees of Valinor. Anyway, most sought after jewels. It wreaks havoc through all of Middle Earth in the greed and the pride and all the things that those things create. Anyway, so long story short, he ends up getting a Silmaril, getting it from the crown of Sauron. Lúthien does a lot to help save him, and she has her own magic that she uses in order to protect him and get him out of the prison there. But his hand is bitten off by a wolf named Karkaroth, the great wolf of Middle-earth. And so he comes back to Thingol, her father, and says, "Yea, my hand bears a Silmaril." But ultimately it's in the belly of a wolf because it was essentially bitten off his hand. The wolf eventually dies. They get the Silmaril back. Both Beren dies. Lúthien does as well. Then they come back to Middle Earth. They are given their life back, and they are then essentially the progenitors, or the ancestry of like Elrond and Elros. Anyway, so that's the whole story. Now here's the funny thing to me about this whole thing that she says is like, they always talk about, we want a strong female character, and they do this for War of the Rohirrim. They're doing this obviously in the Rings of Power, and so they have this idea that, man, there just aren't enough strong female characters, when in fact, perhaps the greatest story that Tolkien wrote, or at least Tolkien, it's not my favorite story that Tolkien ever wrote, but his favorite story, right? His gravestone and his wife's gravestone says Beren and Luthien, right? This was how important it was to him. These are the strong female characters that he wrote. There are many others in Middle-earth, and yet they have to go and create somebody completely out of whole cloth that didn't exist at all. And so this is what bothers me the most about this here, is like, she had an opportunity to pursue something that was already there, or at least have a framework for something that was already there. But they go off and make their own thing that has no bearing, and it's injecting our modern world into Tolkien's Middle-earth, and it creates stories that just don't exist. And so, do I have a whole lot of hope that she's going to do something great with this? She's not a bad writer. They do with their in the sense of the particulars of writing, not necessarily in the story creation, right? In War of the Rohirrim, I saw that movie with all 4 of my kids, and they were all like, I didn't really care, and even they were like, so what happened to the guys in it? Because it's really just the story of her, right? All the men are sort of sideshows here that don't do anything in the entire film. All right, I'm not going to get more of the here. So, do I have hope that it's not that it'll be made? No, because they have to buy the license to it, and maybe it has to pass to one more generation of Tolkien's grandchildren, great grandchildren, who need the money before it gets sold from the Tolkien estate. But yeah.
Well, obviously, there's the problem of cost there too, right? Because obviously, Warner Brothers is notorious now for trying to penny pinch and keep costs down, and they're trying to basically get underneath this like massive debt that they have. And David Zaslav gets a lot of flack for actually getting the company out from under that debt, and I think he's done a pretty good job of doing that. But nevertheless, a lot of the creatives over there in Hollywood don't like him because he is trying to do that, and he's making steps on doing that. So that's obviously something else that I'd have to factor in if the Tolkien estate does indeed make a deal with them to do that, right?
Yeah. I mean, that would. I mean, what did Amazon paid $1 billion or 250 million, wasn't it, for the rights to the appendices to the?
That's what it's been reported, and they said it was like $500 million for the production for 5 seasons, and
so it's like approaching $1 billion.
Yeah, and the show is already being upstaged by a Reacher.
So, oh man! So if they were to sell the rights, like they would command a lot for that. And the question is, how much outside of that? Because the story of Beren and Luthien weaves into so many other tales, right? The characters, Thingol and Melian, they are perhaps, 2 of the most central characters in the first age of Middle-earth. They deal with that. They have the story of Turin and Hurin. They get involved in some of the battles, or don't get involved in some. They have anyway. So they're involved. They're essentially right in the center, geographically speaking, of the first age of Beleriand, and so they'd be involved in a lot. So how much do you start excising out from these stories? Because it's really hard to say, we're going to do the story of Beren and Luthien. Okay, but that involves Thingol and Melian, and we've got some of the sons of Fëanor, Caranthir, and we've got the dwarves and the Nauglamir that comes in at the end when Beren comes in, and we've got Dior, his son, and then eventually you've got Eärendil, and the Eärendil saves the world too. So like, how much are they going to like cut out of this here in order to create the story? That's where it gets really difficult. There is so much interweaving of tales in here that it would be really difficult to say, we're just going to tell the story of Beren and Luthien and kind of ignore all the other stuff. But again, for me, like I am what I proudly call a purist. I'm not a fan of most of these adaptations because none of them are as good as what Tolkien wrote, and they make changes that they think are better, but they never are. even in Peter Jackson's films, when they made changes to Aragorn and they made changes to Elrond and Galadriel and all these characters, I was just like, guys, I know you're trying to do this in order to say like, oh, we have to have more dynamic characters. But when it's not true to Tolkien, it's not true to the world that he created. And I love the world that he created. And so if they do this, this would be the first attempt at a first age story, right? The Middle Earth is divided into 3 ages: the first age, the second age, and the third age. Rings of Power is in the second age. Lord of the Rings, Hobbit is in the third age. This here would be like she does say, like the age, a more mythic time. In a sense, that's true, because there are more grand supernatural beings in a way. You've got like the wolves and the bats and the Huon, the great hound of Valinor, and you've got like Eonwe the hunter, right? These guys who come in that are these great wide characters of supernatural strength. But that doesn't mean that the stories are mythic like you would think, like a Greek myth, like with Zeus and with all that sort of stuff. It's still based around a world of death and destruction and love and loss and all that sort of stuff, not with like grand lightning bolts from the sky. And so I don't think that like if they start going there, I mean, I think of The Hobbit and how they really abused The Hobbit in the films, and I just don't want them to abuse this story and say like, it's a great mythic story, we're going to really dive into the mythic end of Middle Earth. I'm like, no, it's still a grounded story. And I her recent work in The Hobbit and The War of the Rohirrim, although she didn't write War of the Rohirrim, it was her daughter. So,
she produced it though. She was greenlighting it and everything.
Yeah. And I'm sure she read the scripts and was there to help out.
Provided feedback.
Yeah. I don't.
She defended it. She was actually public facing with it as well, doing a lot of the marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And doing interviews like this one with Collider.
Yeah. But I mean, is there a great story there? Yeah. The problem is you need somebody with a vision for it, and like with with Peter Jackson's films, he was the one driving the vision of it. And there's the well-known quote of his where he said, our goal was not to put ourselves into it; it was to put more of what Tolkien wrote into the films. And if you keep true to that, yes, you will make a much better film than you would do if you say, I'm going to make this for, quote, modern audiences. I'm going to make it for the world that I know, not the world that Tolkien wrote it for. And so I think that unless you do that, unless you have a passionate person who loves Tolkien and who wants to be true to his work, you're going to get something that is subpar, that is unacceptably adjusted for what they think an audience wants. And that's the sad thing.
So this kind of brings up a question I asked your co-host while discussing Netflix's C.S. Lewis, Netflix's adaptation of.
You talked to Michael Grumbine? How dare
yes,
you.
I did. About the Chronicles of Narnia and the potential casting of Meryl Streep. And he actually referenced what you guys are doing over there on Exploring Tolkien and theonering.com, and obviously on your YouTube channel, The One Ring. And how you are going through kind of all the changes that Peter Jackson made and kind of rating them, etc., compared it to the literature. And one of the things he says is that while the books are still there, Tolkien's books are there, the novels are there, most people now, when you bring up Tolkien or you bring up the Lord of the Rings, the image that they bring up is the Jackson adaptation, right? That is what they think of. And so my question to him was, when they bring up maybe adapting stories like this that are these love stories, etc., and they're obviously have done kind of feminist angles in previous adaptations, are they doing that intentionally to try to, as I like to always say, what Lucasfilm coined is let the past die, kill it if you have to. And they are literally, by rewriting these stories, they are indeed attempting to kill them, because they are no longer the story that Tolkien wrote. They are the story that for the Rings of Power, for example, right? What did they always say? Like, we're going back to the books, but we're writing the story that Tolkien never wrote. Right. And they are writing the story that Tolkien never wrote, because he didn't write that, and they're telling their own story to try to rewrite what he wrote and try to basically let his story die, be forgotten. Yeah. And when you think of the Silmarillion now, or you think of the Second Age, you think of Rings of Power. At least that's what I think maybe their goal is for a lot of this stuff. What do you make of kind of that theory, that idea? And do you think that is something that these people might be doing either consciously or even maybe in the subconscious?
Well, I think these people all think they're better writers. I think that when it comes down to it, I think they all think that they can write better than Tolkien could write, and I think they can think that. I don't think it just comes to Tolkien. I think they are a product of an education system that props them up and says, look, if you inject these ideals into it, it makes it a better story, rather than saying somebody who went through World War I, who fought in World War I, who lost friends, uh, who bore children that fought in World War II, like all these crazy, horrible experiences he had informed his writing. And these people, the worst that they had were microaggressions in college and somewhere that had to run to a safe space, right? That's what it feels like to me. And so they don't really understand the depth of what Tolkien wrote. And then you lay on top of that Tolkien's strong faith, where that informed so much of his writing, and how he created the characters and how he saw the world, and how providence plays such a huge role. They don't agree with that. They don't think that there is anything outside of the people, outside of the main protagonists in the story, that has any effect. Now, Peter Jackson did, right? He made that
kind of a
point in the
miracle
films.
that you
Yeah,
get that with the Gollum scene right at the end.
totally. Yeah. And now it's even more clear in the books than it is in the films, but he did a serviceable job with that. Now, in the rest of it, it's all just a joke, right? They don't even care. They're not even going to bring it up. Heck, even the Tolkien biography downplayed his faith. But it was such a strong, important role that to not give it any time at all is essentially killing the story that he wrote. And here's the thing, right? You have to accept that his story is successful regardless of the time when it came out, right? The Hobbit is, we're approaching 100 years. It's 90 years old now in 1937. So that story has stood the test of time. People still read it and love it. All my kids have read it and really enjoyed it, right? It's and how many other stories that kids read that are 100 years old will they love? Same thing will go for the Lord of the Rings. Same things. I mean, there are plenty of other authors too. But The Hobbit, like the film that they wrote, will not stand the test of time. The Rings of Power will not stand the test of time. It doesn't stand the test of time of like a year. So to think that these people have the ability to write stories that are better than Tolkien, that they can adjust it to the world that, quote, we live in now, that we have to somehow make it more accessible to the people now, it's untrue, because if you make it accessible to the people now, you are changing the original story, and you are also making it inaccessible to anybody coming in the future. So I don't know. Are they intentionally ruining Tolkien? I don't think they're intentionally ruining it. I think they're so bad that they don't know that they're ruining it because they don't know anything else to do.
Okay. Thank you for that perspective. I appreciate that. I probably disagree on a little bit. I do think there is some intention to this in many cases, especially with the Rings of Power showrunners, and a lot of the statements that they've said and how they contradict each other, and they outright lie in some cases, I think. But you did kind of bring up a point there that I kind of thought of while you were speaking, is that there are other kind of really famous stories that are constantly getting adaptations, and one of those, I think probably one of the most famous, is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, right? And Netflix is doing another adaptation of it. They announced it just last week, right? Mm-hmm. So that kind of goes to the point that you're talking about, and obviously maybe disproves what kind of like that idea, let the past die killed if you have to, is that the story is still there. They're still going back to it. They're still making kind of new adaptations of it. But it also could be proving my point too. At the same time, it's like, well, the other adaptations were made in a different time that maybe honored the source material a little bit better. And so they want to make sure that source material is marred now. So what do you, I mean, I guess it's kind of a similar question, but like kind of what do you make of that, where we do see maybe a certain books, comics, etc., that are adapted multiple times and have like these multiple adaptations? Is that something you kind of maybe see with The Lord of the Rings in the future? Do you think the Tolkien estate does that? Obviously, we haven't really seen that, but they do seem to be greenlighting more and more adaptations. Obviously, there have been, we have had a comic book adaptation. There were some copyright things that went along with that allowed that to happen. I know that because Chuck Dixon, I think, did the adaptation, and he told me all about that story. Now they kind of like strong-armed the estate. with that.
Wow.
But yeah. So like, kind of, what do you make of that idea?
Well, I think there are two ways that many right. So we have, like, for instance, comics, right? We have so many adaptations now of Superman and Batman and Marvel and everything like that. So there are two ways. One is when there's money involved. Like, if you think you can make money off the adaptation, then we will keep getting adaptations. And the second one is if it's in public domain, like Pride and Prejudice, right? There's nobody, anybody can make a Pride and Prejudice film at this point. And so that it's still going to be decades before that happens with anything that Tolkien wrote. I think maybe The Hobbit will be about 15 years. I think, or well, the rerun in 1950, it might not be until the 40s, 2040 or so. In any case, I'd have to look that up. But I don't even know. Like, so is your question, are these adaptations acceptable, or like, what do you? I'm not exactly sure.
So it's more of like, obviously, the previous question I asked was, do you think that these adaptations are being made as basically like, let the past die, kill it if you have to? But now we also see that there are we also see examples of multiple adaptations of certain things, and so I kind of was like, well, it still could be that way. Let the past die, kill it if you have to, because it's Netflix doing it. The previous adaptations had been done in the past, and they want to mar this thing. But obviously, you brought up a good point with the Batman thing, where I think Christopher Nolan actually did a really good job of creating kind of his own vision of Batman, and I don't think that had any kind of negative viewpoint that it was trying to push, where I do feel like when we see a lot of modern adaptations now, Rings of Power being the biggest example, where they're clearly trying, and even War of the Rohirrim, they're clearly trying to push these kind of perverse ideologies, like feminism, for example, with War of the Rohirrim.
Well, what you need in a good adaptation is you need a person with a vision who understands the author, and that's what we're missing in all of these adaptations. And I think with somebody like Christopher Nolan, when you talk about The Dark Knight, that's what he got. You got one person with the vision who understands the villain, who understands like the character. The same thing goes with what Peter Jackson did. So here's the thing: is I seriously don't think like there an intent to destroy Tolkien, in the sense like we want to tear down what he wrote. But see, the thing is their vision. I've talked to enough of these people that have this sort of perspective. Their vision of what he wrote is actually different than the vision of what somebody like you or I would believe is what he wrote, because they see it as a completely different type of story. They miss out on the depth that Tolkien put into it when it comes to his faith, when it comes to what he had experienced, and how, right? They see, for instance, and I hate to bring this up, they see Frodo and Sam's relationship as completely different than what you and I would see, right? It is a relationship of two men in battle together. That is essentially where it comes from. And Sam is, he's like he's a person that essentially Frodo is going to war with. But so many people want to see it as a homoerotic relationship. And it is a sad and it is a wrong thing to do. They don't think they're destroying it. They really do think they're improving the story by making this a part of it. But this goes back to the whole education aspect of it. We are allowed to inject ourselves into the stories that we read as much as we want to when you go through a college, when you go through a liberal arts degree. And these are the writers that we're getting. And so these adaptations are made because they love to inject themselves into it. Whereas these successful adaptations, they look at what the author intended, what the story intends, and we say, let's take that, let's amplify that as we need to in order to tell the story that the author wrote, because the story that the author wrote, particularly in Lord of the Rings, is successful on its own merits without somebody else coming in and saying, we've got to make changes to this to make this more accessible to the modern audience, or to the audience that they want it to be accessible to, because they have their own vision of the world that things need to adhere to. And if things don't adhere to it, then they feel assaulted, then they feel like they are not allowed to be a part of it. And so they have to recreate the world that Tolkien wrote and the vision that they had. And it's just not going to work out. So these adaptations, they will continue to fail because they're only reaching a subset of people. And it's these people who are only like the War of the Rohirrim, right? Like Philippa Boyens' daughter. I can't remember her name. But in any case, yeah, right. They create a tale with a female that was never in the story. She didn't have a name. She had a sentence, and that was it. And you had a great tale where you focus on Helm Hammerhand, and you focus on his sons, and you focus on
Fraley.
yeah, Freylof and his
Freylof.
nephew, and so anyway, you have it out there, but they have to inject their stories into it, because that's what they've been told their entire life makes for a better story, is reading yourself into it rather than reading the author out of it, like understanding the author and what his intentions were.
So I get that. I'll push back a little bit, because I think Boyens here actually does get the depth. I mean, she makes it. I even think she says it here, even in this like little short blurb that she gives, because she says that in the Lord of the Rings you have Aragorn and Arwen, which is a beautiful love story. But before that, there was Lúthien and Beren, and she's saying that there are threads of it obviously in the Lord of the Rings, and I think that goes to kind of the depth that Tolkien had, where he was kind of almost mimicking scripture in some sense, where you have a lot of the stories from the Old Testament that prefigure Christ. Like obviously David prefigures Christ as the king of Israel, right? And then you have all of these prophecies, and Christ fulfills them, etc. And then obviously even in maybe something like Hannah, who's the mother of Samuel, and how she prefigures Mary with Hannah's prayer, and then Mary's song that she sings at the visitation. So to me, like, I think she sees this stuff. I mean, it's hard not to, especially because she worked on the original trilogy, and one would think that Jackson was talking to her about this stuff. They had Tolkien scholars, etc. So how do you kind of maybe explain that with the theory that you're positing here about these writers maybe don't understand the depth, when we have someone here who is kind of talking about that depth, and how Lúthien and Beren is reflected in Aragorn and Arwen?
Well, I'm not even going to say that she really understood the depth in the Lord of the Rings films. Like she didn't understand Faramir and his goodness, so they had to change him into somebody who was tempted by the ring. They didn't understand Aragorn and his destiny that he was already agreed to. So she didn't understand Galadriel and how she was. I came out of that film with I remember my sister-in-law watched it with my fiance at the time, my brother, my sister-in-law, and she was like, "So who's that evil witch in the movie?" I'm like, "Who are you talking about?" She's like, "Oh, that woman who like changed into like got all shiny and everything." I'm like, "Oh, Galadriel. No, she's not evil. She's not evil. What do you mean? She like almost took the ring." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." So like they don't understand how these characters have motivations that can actually be good. They have to be dynamic characters. Aragorn has to change from the reluctant ranger to the semi accepted king, right? It's Faramir in particular. Faramir is an example of sort of that mythic character who is good, who has such a streak of what's the word I'm looking for? In any case, he's not tempted by the ring because he knows what he must do in order to fulfill the role given to him, right? He is not a character who's going to be there and will threaten Frodo in the way that he does in the films. And so I don't even think that Philippa Boyens is willing to accept the things like that Tolkien wrote. So she's already on that edge of not writing in the way that Tolkien wrote his stories. And so I think that the thing is over time, it's just gotten worse. In The Hobbit, with adding Tauriel, in The War of the Rohirrim, with totally creating a new female character. And so I don't think that there's, well, I still think she's a product of the same kinds of people. It's just that it wasn't quite as bad when she was younger, 25 years ago, than now.
And maybe she has more power as well, creative control, and so she doesn't have as many people saying like, "No, you can't do that," or "What are you doing? Like that's ridiculous. We're not doing that."
Right.
Do you think that's obviously that? I mean, it seems to be maybe that's potentially what's going on.
I mean, yeah, there was no. I mean, I still think the vision behind the Lord of the Rings was obviously Peter Jackson and not Philippa Boyens or his wife Fran Walsh. It was Peter Jackson, and so when he was there guiding it, I think he had a better grasp of what Tolkien actually intended for the story to be. Once Philippa Boyens became the executive producer, I guess, of War of the Rohirrim, we see what happens is they create Hera, a character that has no name, and everything is about her. She has to be the big bad. She has to fight the men. She saves the men. She's the only one who sees the treachery in the council. She has no problem. She doesn't change at all because she's great at the start. She's great at the end. and uh, and so that's how these writers want to write, is that we have these strong characters. Now here it's a strong female character, which is apparently all they want to write, but we have these characters and we need to make them as we see a strong character, a strong female character to be, as opposed to what Tolkien would have written with Lúthien, who does go over an arc, um, with plenty of other characters that are out there, but they have to go and create their own and sort of essentially make them a vision of the female or of the character that they want to be in this world, as opposed to what Tolkien actually wrote. So do I think that I don't think she's gonna, I don't think she has the vision of what Tolkien actually wanted to tell his story. She has no vision to tell the story that Tolkien actually wrote, because she still injects herself into it too much. And who knows how bad it would have been had there not been a writing team that might have dampened somebody like her and her desires of writing in the original Lord of the Rings. I mean, look, for some weird reason, they're making the Hunt for Gollum film, which to me seems so odd, because nobody cares about the Hunt for Gollum. We know the beginning of that story. We know the end of that story. Here you're telling us 2 paragraphs from the Council of Elrond in the Fellowship of the Ring, and I'm just like, why? This is not like, there's no vision behind this story. I mean, we got the Gollum game. Nobody cared about that. Nobody's going to really care.
It was a disaster.
That was the worst game I've ever played in my whole life.
The studio shut down. They shut down their development, and they're just publishing now. They shut it down. That's how bad it was.
Yeah.
So I guess that you kind of got ahead of me there. So
sorry.
Any hope that this Lúthien and Beren film, if it actually comes to fruition, if she gets her wishes here, if Philippa Boyens gets her wishes, that it would be halfway decent? What do you think?
The Hunt for Gollum, halfway decent?
No, the Beren, the Lúthien and Beren. Lúthien.
Would it be halfway decent?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe, because you've already have the strong female character that they want. The question is how much would she be there? Like, would they give Beren any agency at all as a male? Because he does do a lot. He's the one that pushes them in order to essentially go after Sauron. He's the one that decides that he will take on the quest. And you know, I've been so disabused of the notion that they can do any good with what Tolkien has done with Tolkien's work at this point, that I'll take a wait and see attitude, but my wait and see is generally like below 0 by a large margin. I don't feel like we are in negative territory, and they have to raise me out of that when it comes to my perspective on how well they can actually write a story anymore. I mean, The Rings of Power is the worst disaster in modern television, in my opinion. Of course, I come from a bit of a skewed perspective, but there's very little redeeming about it when it comes to entertainment value. It's poorly written, it's poorly acted, it's horribly adapted, and so they can't do that. The War of the Rohirrim was, I mean, it was not only an artistic disaster, meaning nobody enjoyed it, but it didn't make any money. They made like $17 million, I think, in worldwide, or maybe it was 24 million worldwide, 17 in the US. So they don't have the ability right now to tell a good story anymore, and so I don't feel like there's going to be much hope until what we need here. This is always what I say. What we need is one person with a real vision of what Tolkien wanted to tell in his stories, and we got that mostly in Peter Jackson's films. We just need that again, and I don't think Philippa Boyens is the person to do it.
If there is one person out there right now to write or direct a Tolkien adaptation, whatever it happens to be, who would you want it to be, or who do you think has that vision or could have that vision if they put their mind to it?
I would have to interview many people in order to find that person. I don't know if there's anybody out there. Because I don't care how good of a filmmaker you are. You can surround yourself with really good people in order to make a film. I care about the vision that you have for the story, and I don't know if there's anybody out there right now who has that vision. I haven't. Like that's it's almost like a personal thing. It's the opposite of what Amazon did. Jeff Bezos says, I want my own Game of Thrones. I'm going to go spend $250 million on the rights to the appendices to Lord of the Rings. I'm going to go hire some people that I think can write this, right? There was no vision there. That was a prideful grab at some sort of, I don't know, money. I guess it doesn't feel like they were trying to make it for money. They were trying to make it for prestige. Like, I want my own Game of Thrones. we're gonna do this.
It's like it's award culture. It's like Hollywood award culture. You make the films for the award now because you know what kind of films those are, regardless of whether or not they're quality.
We need somebody that's willing to make the hard choices, to do the hard work in order to get this film made. That's what Peter Jackson did. Much as I disliked the movies originally, not horribly disliked, but just was disappointed in them. He created storyboards, he created everything in order to try and sell the story and get it to the right people in order to fund it. And he spent a lot of time and energy to do that. And what we don't need is, we don't need a committee. We don't need a CEO. We don't need a showrunner to say like, hey, let's make this story about Beren and Luthien, without actually having a vision for what the story would end up being like. Because you need a person with that vision, and a person who understands Tolkien first and foremost. Who would be the bright person to tell the story that I want to tell in Tolkien's world? Well, that would probably be me, because that's the only story. Not that I can do, but what I mean is like, the story that I see in my head is the story that I want to see on screen. But that's never going to happen. And so it's always going to disappoint me in some way. That's why you mentioned earlier, people see the Lord of the Rings, like you mentioned earlier that Michael said this, right? The people see the Lord of the Rings through Peter Jackson's film's eyes at this point. And it is disappointing somewhat. This is why I still love Ted Naismith and John Howe and Alan Lee and their original artwork from the 80s and 90s, because it was such a vision without Tolkien, but yet you got competing visions of it. And so you could kind of see things from different perspectives, but not really lose the vision you had in your own head. And on Fairy Stories, Tolkien's famous, I don't know if it's famous, his well-known essay about why it's important to have these fairy stories like this in the world and what impact that they have. Right, the greatest artistic endeavor is an author speaking reality into the minds of his reader, because it's the author's vision, but it's based on everything that the reader has experienced, and they see it in their own eyes. And so I'm always disappointed. This is why people always say, films are never as good as the books, because it's never as good as what you can see in your own head as you're reading the story. And so I will never be happy with a story that's made by somebody else in Tolkien's world. I can appreciate it. I can enjoy it, but I will never be happy about it. And so I'm just a curmudgeon that way.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me. I think you're right. Obviously, with that, I think that it's always your vision, your imagination, what you conjure up is going to be better than what you see on film and TV. And I do think there is something, though, to the fact that once you see that either television adaptation or film adaptation, those do kind of just the way our human minds work. Those things kind of take over almost our imagination, and you have to like kind of fight back to remember like, well, is what you kind of had imagined when you first read it before you had watched the movie. And then obviously if you watch the movie first, it's probably even more difficult to do that if you read it afterwards, right? Because you already have these kind of images now of what they are in your mind when you're reading it. So that is something to take into account. But thank you so much for joining me here on the Turn Report. Always glad to have you and your perspective on Tolkien. Hopefully that they do find someone with the vision. Maybe Andy Serkis has that vision for The Hunt for Gollum, and he takes those couple of pages that Tolkien wrote.
Paragraphs, a couple of paragraphs. It's not even pages.
A couple of paragraphs, paragraphs and is able to like make something into it. Obviously, I think that is possible. I mean, The War of the Rohirrim should have been a great film from the couple of pages in the appendices there. And sadly, they decided to go with the feminist route. But hopefully, maybe Andy Serkis puts his artistic vision here and is maybe acts as that kind of person who does that. And maybe he does create something great. So
I hope so. I just feel like it's a story nobody really cares about, and we'll see how they end up telling it. But maybe they're fine. I don't know. No, they won't find anything good. Who am I kidding?
All right. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Hope you have a great day, and hope you have a wonderful, blessed Easter as well.
Thanks, Sean. You too.